and I want to welcome everyone to this special called board meeting. Please excuse the absence of Bobby Jenkins, Janelle Shepard, Ricky Raven, and John Steen, but John Steen is here, so no. Let me read that again. Please excuse the absence of Bobby Jenkins, Janelle Shepard, and Ricky Raven due to duties requiring their attention elsewhere. Do I have a motion to approve these absences?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Okay, all in favor, the motion passes. Please record in the meetings, in the minutes, that we have a quorum. Board members and any other members of the general public who are here and tuning in online, the board will be meeting in closed session due to security-sensitive information we will be discussing, and no formal actions will be voted on today. Before the board goes into executive session, the chair, I must announce, for agenda items 2A and 2B, executive session, the board will meet in closed session to deliberate the following matters. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.076, the board will meet in closed session to discuss security recommendations from a Department of Information Resources contractor and internal audit security recommendations regarding data administration and governance. No other business of the board will be discussed before we reconvene in open session. The time is now 10:41. So shall we? Okay, the executive session has concluded. No action was taken during the executive session. The time is now 12:04. The board is now reconvened in regular session. This concludes our special called board meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second? All in favor? All right. All in favor, motion passes. Board meeting is concluded. So we can deal with lunch.
Yes. I'm out. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay, so we'll take a little break. 2 minutes. We'll wait. No, we have to wait. We have to adjourn. Fred Fedius, the Vice Chair of the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. The Chair, Ms. Shepard, sends her apology. She's unable to join us today, so I'll be presiding over the committee meeting today. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet. So everyone, please turn off your cell phones. Okay, I wanted to announce that we will be taking items 5W, a report to the committee on the results of the validity study for the Texas Success Initiative assessment, out of order today. This item will be heard after item 5U2. Item 1B is lunch. So we are now going to take a 20-minute lunch break, and we will reconvene at 12:30. It's now 12:07. Thank you. So 12:30. Items listed on consent are 5J, S 1 through 5, T 1 through 2, U1, U4 through 9, and 5 1 through 7. Any questions or discussion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is public testimony on agenda items. We do not have anyone registered to testify, so we'll go on to the next item. Item number 5, matters relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. Agenda item 5A is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. This is an information item only. Dr. Ann Kinmer, Associate Provost, Undergraduate Studies, Professor of Biological and Agricultural Engineering at Texas A&M University, serves as the co-chair of this committee. Dr. Kinmer will provide a brief summary of the committee activities and be available to answer questions. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much, and it is certainly a pleasure to join you this afternoon and give you a very brief overview of the activities of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. Don't panic, I only have 3 slides, and I recognize that you have an extensive agenda, so I will be brief. The UEAC, as we call it, it makes for a rather interesting acronym, consists of 24 voting members because much of our work involves policies related to public education institutions. The vast majority of our membership comes from both 2-year and 4-year public institutions in Texas, but we do also have a couple of representatives from private institutions and from public health related institutions who join our group. And we have a non-voting student member who brings some very nice, fresh perspectives to our discussion. We meet regularly at least twice per year, and we had 2 meetings during the past year. Could somebody please advance the slide? We had a number of agenda items during our past 2 meetings, but you will find that there's detailed information about that in your agenda packet. I really wanted to focus my comments today on a couple of areas where we really focused much of our attention as a working committee. The first relates to the Texas core curriculum. As some of you are aware, the Texas legislature reframed the core curriculum, which provides the general education components to our undergraduate programs, for implementation in the fall of 2014. So now that we're about 3 years into this new structure for the Texas core curriculum, the UEAC has been working with coordinating board staff to just kind of review how things are going now that we have all adopted this. And so some of our discussions over the past year have focused on what are the characteristics of courses that are included in the curriculum to fulfill these general education requirements. What can we do to help facilitate the transferability of these courses for students who move from one institution to another? And what are appropriate strategies for assessing the effectiveness of these general education components, and how can we best report the effectiveness of that assessment? Many of these topics will continue into the upcoming year. In particular, we will continue discussion of what the course characteristics are that are appropriate for inclusion in the general education component. I even anticipate that there may be a working group that's put together from UEAC members to more specifically address that. We'll talk about best practices that some of the institutions are using as part of their assessment of the general education component. We now have 5 institutions who have submitted their reporting for their general education component to the coordinating board, and I think it will be interesting for those of us who have not yet gone there to find out what they've done and what strategies they've used, and are there tips and tricks that we can use to facilitate our own work in that regard. We also will discuss something called the component area option. This is a section of the general education as defined by the state that is fairly flexible. And so the way it has been interpreted from one institution to the next can be quite different. And so I think we really want to take a look at whether that is accomplishing what it needs to accomplish as it's being implemented across Texas institutions. Let me see if this will work. Our second general area of discussion was the new 60 by 30 Texas initiative. In particular, we talked as a committee about how the older initiative of closing the gaps really kind of leads into newer work that supports the 60 by 30 initiative. And there were some themes that came up where we think that the committee, the UAC committee, really can provide some ideas and thoughts and recommendations on how this impacts undergraduate education. In particular, college readiness. What can we be doing as institutions to make certain that all of our students, including those that are at risk for any number of issues, are successful in completing their degree program? How can we make certain that our programs are inclusive across all student groups? Are there things that we can do with our academic advising programs to help students stay on track to timely degree completion? And what can we do to help students and programs and advisors and really our career centers communicate the marketable skills that come from the various degree programs that we offer? As with our work on the Texas core curriculum, some of these topics will continue from the past year into the current year. In particular, we'll talk about best practices related to student pathways because this can often facilitate college readiness and support the needs of at-risk students. And we will also continue our work regarding marketable skills. Are there questions from the committee?
Any questions for Dr. Kinnemer?
A quick question, I think, if it's long. Just the core curriculum, I don't know much about it, but it just doesn't seem like that ought to change much, like over decades even.
It provided a little bit more guidance on the types of learning outcomes that we hope to address within each component of the core area. And so there was quite a commonality in the various components, and so we still all need to teach math classes. We still all need to include science classes. But is there a need to include teaming across multiple areas of the core? Should we be including communication skills in science classes because students need to practice their communication in more than just their English or their communication requirement? And so the definition of these learning outcomes that apply across various components of the core is what is new for the 2014 version. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Along that same line, is there any discussion going on in the committee in terms of, credit hours for a Texas core curriculum? I mean, are you discussing that and saying, should it be 130 hours? Is there any discussion about that or not at all?
The core currently is defined as 42 hours. And I think by and large, the institutions at least are able to deal with the core as it's defined. I'm sure that there are opinions out there. It is not something that we have discussed at length.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just
Dr. Peebles?
one quick comment. The 42 hours is defined in statute, and then by rule, the board has defined the 42 as not only the maximum number of hours, but the minimum is defined by statute. And most of the time when the hours are questioned, it's generally questioned around the notion that there are too many hours in the core rather than not enough. And I will point out that if you look at other states and other institutions and so forth, 42 is a bit higher than the norm that you would find, which is usually somewhere around 30 to 36. But Texas does have legislative requirements for 6 hours of American government and 6 hours of American history that constitute a significant portion of the core.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kinnemer, for coming from Texas A&M and serving on the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next item is item number 5B, is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Lower Division Academic Course Guidelines Manual Advisory Committee. This also is for informational item only. The chair of the committee could not be here today, but Dr. Rex Peebles will provide a brief summary of the latest activities and be available to answer questions. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, both of the co-chairs of this committee are unable to be here today, so you will get the benefit of my wit and wisdom on this, which I will make very short. So the Academic Course Guide Manual Committee deals with the courses that make up the Academic Course Guide Manual, which is that list of courses that are available to public two-year institutions for automatic contact hour reimbursement for funding. And what the committee does primarily is look at those courses. They look at course descriptions. They look at student learning outcomes. And they also look at the usage of those courses. So one of the big things that they do every year is analyze whether courses are actually being utilized or not. Part of the goal of the Academic Course Guide Manual deals with the transferability and applicability of those courses to four-year institutions. And so a big part of what they try to determine is whether those courses are being used in transfer or not. So rules require that at least 5 four-year institutions accept those courses in transfer and will apply them to degrees. They do look at whether the courses are actually being utilized by two-year institutions, and also through the Texas Common Course numbering system that will show equivalencies between two-year colleges and four-year schools. We look at also the frequency of the use of those courses at four-year institutions as well. And when that frequency falls usually below a threshold of 3 or 4 institutions actually using the course and enrollments are very low, then what you will see behind the blue pages in this, and we'll get to that as an action item in a moment, is the courses that may be recommended for deletion, but they also deal with additions as well. So in this past year, the ACGM, like the UEAC committee, is also made up of 24 members, most of which are from public 2-year and 4-year institutions, and there'll be faculty or instructional administrators that serve on the committee.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Dr. Peebles? Hearing none, we'll go to item agenda 5C. It's consideration of adopting the Lower Division Academic Course Guide Manual Advisory Committee's recommendation to the committee relating to changes in the ACGM. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. And so as I said, for a course to be included in the ACGM, we usually request that 5 universities must accept and apply the course to a bachelor's degree. So again, trying to ensure the transferability and applicability of these courses. In any time that a lower division course is offered by 3 or fewer community colleges, that's an automatic trigger for review. And if that review reveals that they haven't been offered very often or enrollments are very, very low in these courses, then they may be recommended for deletion. So the action item that you see in front of you is that 99 courses be deleted from the Academic Course Guide Manual. And what happens with this is we put them on a list for deletion. They're on the list for deletion for a period of 2 years. And during that 2-year time period, institutions can come back to the Academic Course Guide Manual and appeal that those courses be kept in the manual if necessary and present a case for that. And for example, one of the actions taken by the ACGM in this past year was there were 2 biotechnology courses that were slated for deletion, and institutions made an appeal, and the Academic Course Guide Manual agreed to retain those courses because while they're not utilized very often, and sometimes they do have low enrollments, they do fill an important niche for people who want to be biotechnicians and largely working in labs and that kind of thing. So they are vital to a 2-year degree, even though they're in the transfer manual. So what you have in front of you then is the list of courses that have been, after 2 years on the list, are now slated for deletion as of August 31 of this year. And if they're still on the list, then that means that for the vast majority of those, we've never received any comments about keeping them, and no appeals were made to the Academic Course Guide Manual.
Any questions or discussion?
If a course is deleted from the ACGM, what impact does it have? Does it have any impact for transferability at a later point if a student has taken that and transfer?
No, I mean, it kind of follows the same rule that most catalogs have, like a 5-year rule on them. And so in this case, even if the course is deleted, If a student took it this year, for example, and they transfer next year or year after, that course would still be considered to be a transferable and applicable course. What would happen is that institutions can no longer offer the course for funding going forward, but it doesn't affect their applicability going backwards.
Dr. Peoples, so on the you say there are 90 on this list?
I think they said 99. 99.
99. So this is the end of the line for these courses as we take this vote?
Yes, at this point, now, it's also important to remember that if in the course of the next year or two, someone decides that one of these courses, for example, a reason for teaching it comes back, then they can come back to the ACGM and apply to have the course put back into the ACGM. They can also apply for what's called unique needs status, which will then allow that course to be offered by that institution if it'll be transferred and accepted by their institutions. So it takes them out of the course guide manual, but it doesn't preclude them from ever coming back again.
Okay. I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think there are only 3 of us here that are actually on the committee, right?
They're the ones that should be
So
voting.
you'll notice that we're not hogging this.
No, no.
It's
We had the
us
same
two that can
situation
make
at
the
the-
motions in the second.
We
so
had
you'll-
the same situation at the last committee meeting.
Kind of alternated, you know.
Yes, yes, yes. So
I just want everybody to understand we're
You have
not-
observed that correctly,
Okay.
Mr. Steen. That's
All right.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 5D, is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee. This is for informational item purpose only. Dr. Ronald Goretz, chair of this committee, will provide a brief update of the activities and will be available to answer questions. Dr. Goretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee members and the other board members that are present, and the commissioner and commissioners. I will address Steve very, very quickly. The 12 members of the advisory committee meet at least yearly. The years that there is a legislative session, we meet twice. One of the meetings, the meeting that is only once in the interim sessions, interim year, and once during the legislative session years, is dealt with reviewing a very detailed financial report that we request all of the 29 programs in the past, 29 programs in the past, there'll be one less in the future, to submit to us, and also a very detailed programmatic report asking them how they're doing their job, how they're fulfilling the intent of Public Law 282 from 1977. And the committee members go through that and then have the option to ask the program's questions about how they're doing so. The second meeting during the legislative year is specifically to handle a funding recommendation to you all with the trustee funds that the legislature provides. There are 3 elements that we oversee. One is the Faculty Development Center for Family Medicine in Texas. That's currently located at the University of North Texas. The other program is rotations in both rural areas and public health. And then the largest of the 3 elements, are 95% of the funding, is for direct supportive residency training within family medicine programs that are spread throughout the state. So those are the functions of the committee itself. I'd like to make just a couple of comments, and then with the chair's indulgence, bridge into E and make the recommendation. You can either announce that, or I can just do that and then answer any questions with Commissioner Peebles. The 2 comments I would like to make, and I feel like I'm probably addressing the choir to a certain degree, are about outcomes, and the second one about funding. I've been privileged to be part of the academic world for over 30 years, and part of this advisory committee for almost that long. 1988 was the first time that I participated with, and I've chaired it for almost 20 years. I am fortunate enough to also know one of the original authors of the bill in 1977, Lyndon Olson. So I probably know the intent of this legislation better than just about anybody does. Its intent has always been and remains to produce primary care physicians, specifically family physicians, for rural and underserved areas of this state. From an outcomes perspective, we have 761 residents that are helped in some way in the 29 programs. That's the most recent number. We also have those rural rotations that are very important to create interest in medical students. And we also have the Faculty Development Center that assists programs, particularly those that are not located within large academic medical centers, to assist them with the accreditation requirements that are needed for them to stay fully accredited so that they can do their job and produce docs for the state. That intent also is one of the reasons why it's very critical, in my opinion, that not all programs be located within the 9 big counties where there are medical schools and large teaching hospitals and hospital districts that provide a certain amount of funding that you don't have in the programs that are located outside of those areas. Over 9,000 physicians have been trained under this program since '77. Almost 80% of them have stayed within the state of Texas, according to our data, and a large percentage of those go to underserved areas. And I would say, without any question, that the rural and underserved areas in the state would be less well served without this program. And the need for it continues because, unfortunately, now I'll bridge to the funding part, the program has never been adequately funded since the 70s. The intent of the legislation originally was to have about roughly 20% of the cost of residency funding to be covered by this. It's way less than that. It probably is less than 3 or 4% in most circumstances, maybe less than 1 or 2. So the slide here shows the funding for the last 10 years. It has been all over the map. Obviously, we've been in some fiscally tight legislative years. If you show the next one. This is actually the number of the residents and the per resident amount. The only point I want to make about the funding piece here is that I do think that we are at a critical amount of funding, a minimal critical amount. The reason for that is largely related to the fact that education takes time, costs money, and the old model where you could hire faculty, they would essentially, because of their mission and intent, give up a piece of their income that they could have made in private practice is no longer applicable. I can't hire faculty in my own program for anything less than what they typically make in the group practices that are out there. And there really is only 3 other places you can offset that cost if it's not provided by state funding. One is counties that have hospital districts possibly can access that funding. Remember, a number of these programs are not in hospital district counties and don't have that accessibility of funds at all. They might approach their city, their county in some other ways. You all know how tight that funding is now. The other option they could do is working with their teaching hospitals, go through 1115 waiver money. Some programs have done that. Those programmatic reports that I've mentioned have allowed that, have been mentioned before. And the third and very most common way is to ramp up clinical income by the faculty. The largest piece of that is generally through Medicaid income. I don't have to mention to you what is intended to happen with Medicaid clinical costs. So that ability to offset that cost when these funds are cut are going to be less and less in the future. So you end up with a very interesting and dilemma that will be in front of us very soon. So it is my hopes that I think that you realize those issues and those forces that are going on. The committee and its members and those residents that it represents to you are very thankful for the recommendation that you all made to the legislature earlier. I just simply want to go on record about some issues that I've seen evolving over the last 30 years and 20 years, and particularly the last 10 years, and hope that those funds can be more correlated with the appropriate and great outcomes the program has afforded the state instead of the direction they seem to be going. That's the end of my report under item D.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. We'll move on to item 5E, and that is consideration of adopting the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee's recommendation to the committee to support relating to the distribution of funds trusted into the Coordinating Board's Support Family Residency Programs for fiscal year 2018 and report on trustee funds distributed in fiscal year 2017. Was there any
Do you want me to
questions
quickly-
or discussions first?
We evaluated trying to be as fair as possible with the reduction that the legislature appropriated for us, and the recommendation before you is to do roughly a 33 or a third % cut in the per resident funding amount for the programs, roughly the same for the Faculty Development Center, and to maintain the rotations, because if you cut the rotations, it would not, student interest is really predicated a lot on whether they can offset the cost of going someplace else to do a rotation, particularly in the rural areas. So that's the recommendation before you are the three areas that you see in the packet for you.
Right. Dr. Peebles, do you have any comments?
No, we concur with the recommendation of the committee.
Okay.
I'll
Questions?
second, but I have a question. So, Doctor, how long have you been doing this?
I've been on or connected to the advisory committee 30 years,
Wow. And you've been chairman of it? or
almost
chair?
20.
20. So looking at this graph, explain to me this, why that line is so,
It's
the way
a-
it is. What's happened over the years? Tell me about that.
Well, to really give the full explanation, I have to go all the way back when the intent of the program, I think, was better understood, and when the rural areas and the underserved areas, had probably a different type of voice than what they have now. We're a relatively small program. In fact, one of the blogs that the TMA produced, the Texas Medical Association produced after the end of the session, when they came up to discussing the cut that happened in the conference committee to our funding, their comment was it's a small program and didn't have the same champions that others had. So we are a bit subject, I think, to not having a David Sibley, who was a senator at the time, that understood this program extremely well, or the Lyndon Olsons of the world, who actually authored the program, or have a point-specific champion for this particular type of program. I dare say I know there are programs that have been totally cut that you all have shepherded and overseen, but I don't think that the outcome and the need for this program is very correlatable with the funds that you see in front of you. Small amounts end up being cut because they don't have the same voice as larger amounts do often.
So in 2012 and 2013, you hit that low point, and then you started going up again. And so you're saying during that period you had a champion, somebody that was...
We did, actually. There was a representative that was head of one of the Public Health Committee in the House who championed new residency creations to match the new student creations in the medical schools. And he also, at the same time, championed the sustainable funding for the programs that existed. There is a significant issue in what I call a bait-and-switch philosophy, and that's to preferentially fund new positions without understanding the base funding that's required behind it when educational dollars are precious, to say the very least. So if you can preferentially fund new positions, which I think is important, but if you undercut what's sustainable for the existing programs, there's a point where programs may close, and there is one program this year under the advisory program that will close, and their statement is because of the increased cost for accreditation going forward. Well, you can interpret that any number of different ways. Appreciate those questions.
Any other questions or discussion? Dr. Goretz, thank you for being here, and thank you for all your work with the Family
Thank you all
Residency
for the
Advisory
support
Committee.
you've been for us through the years, too. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. We have a motion on the floor by Ms. Acosta and a second by Mr. Steen. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next agenda item is item 5F, is a report to the committee on activities of the Joint Admissions Medical Program in consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to funding appropriated to the Joint Admissions Medical Program for fiscal years 2018 and 2019. This is an information item only. Dr. Peebles and Dr. James Scott Wright.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Executive Director of the Joint Admissions Medical Program will provide a brief overview of the program's activities.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. And I have a prepared statement to make about the program and then obviously answer any questions that you have. The Joint Admissions Medical Program was established by the Texas Legislature in 2001 through the efforts of Republican House Member Teal Bivens from Amarillo and Democrat Royce West from Dallas to assist certain economically disadvantaged students in preparing for and succeeding in medical school. The program provides undergraduate and medical school scholarships, summer undergraduate internships and stipends, and extensive MCAT preparation programming for undergraduate students in the participating institutions around the state. There are 66 such undergraduate institutions, 32 public and 34 private. JAMP provides funding to the public undergraduate institutions to build a broader pre-med curriculum and tutoring and mentoring programs which benefit JAMP students as well as the general pre-medical population at those schools. Students are selected for participation in JAMP based on criteria established by the JAMP Council, which includes proof of economic disadvantage, a minimum of 27 credit hours of undergraduate coursework with at least a 3.25 GPA, an SAT or ACT score higher than the state average. Once admitted, students who meet all continuing eligibility criteria, which include a 3.25 GPA, both undergraduate and science, successful completion of summer internship programs, and the prescribed MCAT score are guaranteed admission to one of the 9 participating medical schools in Texas. Since 2002, more than 3,600 undergraduate students have applied for entrance into JAMP. More than 1,500 have been admitted. Because JAMP is a competitive program, the JAMP Council desires to admit only students who will benefit from the program and who are likely to succeed. Therefore, extensive strides are taken to interview selected applicants before they are admitted and to identify those who have both the cognitive and non-cognitive qualities expected of excellent physicians. Each year, the JAMP Council devotes significant time to the process of interviewing these students around the state. In addition, to prevent a financial burden for the applicants, these interviews are conducted by medical school faculty and administrators who travel to 5 hub cities around the state where they interview the undergraduate students. Students admitted into JAMP are provided undergraduate and medical school scholarship support, as well as focused stipends for summer internship programs and travel costs for medical school and residency interviews. In addition to financial support, an extensive medical college admissions test preparation program has been developed to broaden student science readiness and to support student preparation for success on the admissions exam. Students are provided with a detailed program to develop and improve critical analysis and reasoning skills, as well as to provide enrichment in biology, chemistry, biochemistry, and the behavioral sciences to support and supplement the academic courses at their home institutions. Students are also participate in 2 summer internship programs at the participating Texas medical schools. These internships are designed to introduce students to the medical school environment and curriculum, create an understanding of and appreciation for issues of cultural awareness, ethical standards, and professionalism in medicine. Finally, the summer programs give the students vital clinical experiences which serve to broaden their understanding of the realities of medicine in the 21st century. As of 2017, 400 JAMP students have graduated from medical school, 389 of whom are currently in or have completed residency programs. The 11 others are applying for entrance into residency after taking time off for various reasons. Of these 389, 61% have entered primary care residency programs. This is compared to less than 50% of the general population of medical school graduates who enter primary care fields. In addition, 64% of the 389 were placed in residency programs in Texas, which increases the likelihood that they will stay in the state for their career and serve the population of Texas. Generally, the state's medical schools place less than 50% of their students in residency programs in our state. So therefore, JAMP is meeting needs in Texas in both the kind as well as the numbers of physicians. The JAMP Council and program administrators are very proud of the success of JAMP We recognize that the number of JAMP students graduating from medical school thus far is small compared to the time period in which the program has existed. This is due largely to the fact that the process of educating physicians from undergraduate school through medical school and residency is a long and rigorous one. That we have more than 489 students currently in the pipeline is encouraging. These JAMP students will no doubt meet many needs of the population of Texas, caring for Texas residents in their hometowns, both rural and urban, serving their needs in primary care settings as well as specialized clinics, and providing medical role models with backgrounds similar to their own. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Dr. Wright?
Dr. Wright, tell me about yourself and help me understand how you're involved in this program.
So I am the executive director of the Texas Health Education Service, which houses JAMP. It also houses the Texas Medical and Dental Schools Application Service, as well as a few other entities. By legislation, the administration of JAMP is put with the Texas our application service. Because it was an existing service, and we had the administrative know-how, et cetera, to do that. So I run that service. I've been connected to JAMP since its inception in 2000, 2001. Initially as a consultant to the JAMP Council in my capacity as Director of Admissions at UT Southwestern Medical School. Thereafter as a JAMP Faculty Director, as Associate Dean at University of Texas at Dallas, and now in my capacity as the Executive Director. So I've sort of been in connection with it forever in different capacities, and which is, in fact, I think benefited me and the program in general, because I have the perspective from each side of the sort of the continuum of the program.
So who actually does the selecting? Did you say it's a committee?
The JAMP Council. The JAMP Council is composed of one member from each of the 9 participating medical schools, a faculty member from each of the 9 medical schools, and then there is an alternate member from each school as well. It is that body, the council, that ultimately decides who will be interviewed, and then finally who will be admitted into the program.
So it's pretty challenging.
Yes.
Because you talked about the long and rigorous road they're going to go down at that point to try to identify those students that are going to go the distance on it.
That's right. It's because we're talking about students who are young in their undergraduate careers, freshmen initially with the program currently as sophomores. And so we're talking about 19, 20-year-old kids who all of them come into the program with high expectations, with a lot of energy and motivation. Some of them decide, this isn't what I want to do after all. We've had students who have gone into other health professions, such as dentistry or pharmacy, which we see as a success. We did enable them to sort of make it along a pathway into a career in the health professions. Some of them don't make it academically and are not able to go forward. So it's a bit of a variety of things, but you're right, it is an enormous challenge and not unusual in programs of this type where we're admitting very young students into programs that connect both undergraduate and medical school. So across the country, when we look at these type of combined programs, the attrition rate is often pretty significant for those reasons and a variety of others as well.
This is really an admirable program. I think it's interesting. I'm glad you told us about the history, because we talk about the partisanship now, and that's interesting that
it was a fascinating story to watch unfold back in really 99, 2000, 2001.
Yeah, with Senator Royce West and then the late Teal Bivens getting together to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the good work you're doing.
Thank you. I just make a quick comment. Our board approved, you mentioned you were admissions director at Southwestern
Yes.
Health Science Center, and I took organic chemistry, and this board approved recently a PhD in organic chemistry, and that brought back memories. I was going like, whoa. So it is very rigorous. Dr. Peebles?
With my apologies for the mistake we made on your notes, this is an action item.
It is, okay.
Approval.
So we do need a motion to be made for approval.
So move.
Second, okay. A motion made by Mr. Seen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you, Dr. Wright. Agenda item 5G is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Graduate Medical Education Expansion Program, the Primary Care Innovation Program, and the statewide preceptorship program. This is an informational item only. Dr. Peebles?
And this is indeed an informational item only.
Thank you.
You got this right. And what I'll do is I'll just give you a little brief overview of the three programs that are involved in this particular agenda item. And one is GME funding in general, but there's a couple of different parts to this, and one is the planning and partnership grants that are designed to try to increase the number of residency programs that are out there and bring new entities into residency programs and to create new positions. And hospitals that may formerly, for example, have not had residency programs or not had a residency program in a particular area, these funds are designed to help them with their startup costs and their planning for getting the approvals that they need to offer residency slots and so forth. And they've been very successful in the first round of this that's in your report. In the 14-15 biennium, there were 10 new residency programs created as a result of these funds. And in the most previous biennium of 16-17, we did give out 13 one-time awards of $250,000 each to institutions and institutions that help create more residency programs. So it's been very successful. And then the other major piece of this is the GME expansion grant programs themselves. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the idea of the 1.1 to 1 ratio of there should be 1.1 residency slots for every one person who graduates from a medical school in Texas. And of course, this is all based on a lot of what the JAMP program has behind it, for example, in the previous presentation about family practice, and that is that if you can get folks to do their residencies in Texas, then they are likely to stay in Texas, and they're likely to stay where they did their residency programs. And over the years, we've managed to expand this. And what I will tell you is that with the increase in funding over the past few years, and this is one item that not only survived this recent legislative session in terms of budget cuts, but also got a substantial increase in its funding up to $97 million. And I think it's important to point out that what that will allow us to do is, at this moment, it gets us close at least to the 1.1 to 1 ratio. But with new medical schools coming on board in Dell Medical, we'll soon start graduating students. UT-RGV will have medical students in the future. Incarnate Word has started a medical program. There's the partnership between TCU and University of North Texas with a new medical school. Then at that point, we will not be at the 1.1 to 1. So it's an enormously, in some sense, it's a very expensive program to run, but it's also a very important one in trying to maintain and look at the medical needs for the residents of the state of Texas going forward.
Okay. Thank you for the update.
And there's two other pieces of this that
Okay.
I'll give you right quick. And one is on Primary Care Innovation Program, which we've had for a number of years. And I would just tell you that program was not funded in the coming legislative session. And part of the notion behind this is that at least some of the residents that it took care of before can be taken up with the expansion grants, but it's still a pot of money that was used with a focus on primary care that will not be there going forward. And the last is the statewide preceptorship program, which was recreated or brought back again in the previous legislative session and was funded again at its current levels in this immediate past legislative session. And the idea behind it is to take students that are still in medical school and try to encourage them to choose primary care careers by offering on-site experiences for them around the state of Texas. And as you can see, we have in fiscal year 2016, for example, there were well over 300 students that participated in this particular program.
Any questions, discussion? If not, we'll move on to item 5H. Yes, Mr. Steen.
So when we took that action on 5F, I saw our general counsel huddling. Maybe I know what he was huddling about, but could we take action on that since it wasn't noticed as an action item?
It is noticed. It is noticed as an action item. It talks about a report and consideration.
Oh, okay, got you.
And that's,
Was that what you were confirming?
yes, sir.
Okay, good, okay. Sorry.
No,
Okay.
no worries. Thank you, Mr. Steen. We'll continue on. Agenda item 5H is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the report on the Autism Grant Program. Members, you have a copy of this report with your materials. Dr. Peebles?
Thank you. So you may recall that in the previous legislative session, there was money given to look at autism programs in 3 specific areas: parent-directed treatment, board-certified behavior analyst training for teachers and paraprofessionals, but also some money given for research, development, and evaluation of innovative autism treatment models. So we have 3 separate pieces of this particular grant program that we run. There was a total of $2.25 million for this, and so for the parent-directed treatment program, with a maximum grant award of $250,000. And the whole idea behind this was to direct as much money as possible to folks with autism spectrum disorder and to provide treatment for them and to help with that. And so it's supposed to be at least 750 students, and we have met those targets. The second piece of this was $950,000 for analyst training for board-certified behavior analyst training for teachers and paraprofessionals. And a lot of this is directed toward folks who actually work with kids with autism and to give them the training that they need to be able to work with the students in the classroom and that kind of thing. And then the last is research, development, and evaluation, and there's approximately $700,000 provided for that. All of this money is directed to existing centers at Texas institutions that deal with autism and work with kids and do research on it and so forth. And we have expended the money. We will soon have all of our RFAs are already out, and we will soon be expending money for the next round of this. This program was also funded at its previous level for the next biennium as well.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Yes.
On the parent-directed treatment, can you shed some quick light to how that piece of the program is taught? Do they actually have to go to the institution, or is there like community partners that help do some of that, or how does the parent-directed treatment work?
Come on up. Stacy will provide you with some details for this, but the basic idea behind this is to help, particularly to help parents
Right.
At home, and to be able to provide some support for the kind of training they may get in school or in a public setting, perhaps, but to also then help with those students as well. And so I'll let Dr. Silverman.
Good afternoon. I'm not talking to you about GME today, so that's shocking. So there are, in your handout, in your report, it kind of gives you a brief overview of each of the treatments. And for Texas A&M University, their Center of Disability and Development actually goes to and conducts home visits. So they identify the parents and then they go to them. And I believe some of the others do as well. But the program was, one thing I'd like to add is that We had to get it up and running very quickly. It went through negotiated rulemaking, which slowed us down a little bit, but the interest from the institutions has been just really outstanding, overwhelming, and the idea that we're actually providing real care to these children is really impressive. And we had some high marks to achieve, I think that, and I think that we're going to hit them and probably surpass that. So.
And in your opinion, is this program touching the rural areas and the parents in rural areas? I mean, I see most of the institutions listed are basically located in a metropolitan city. So I
Yes.
just wondered how they get disseminated into the rural parts of our state.
We've got a second round of grants that are just going out now, and we actually have some are focused on getting out into the more rural communities, especially with transportation and getting folks out to actually teach teachers and then give teachers the ability to deal with these children appropriately in the classroom. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Dr. Peoples?
The legislation for this does require that the money be given to those universities and what have you that already have existing centers for the treatment of autism. So part of it is we're somewhat confined to those centers, and those centers tend to be located in major metropolitan areas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we're certainly trying to make sure that at least some of these programs are trying to reach out to the rural areas as well. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Silverman. If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion? Moved by Ms. Acosta, second by Mr. Steen. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next, agenda items 5I is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Field of Study Advisory Committees and the Program of Study Advisory Committees. This is for informational item only. Dr. Peebles?
So thank you. So just a quick update on where we are with the fields of study and programs of study, which has become a major initiative of the coordinating board. We still have, as reported last time, we still have one field of study that's been revised, that's Mexican American, but I am happy to report that later in your agenda you will see recommendations for approval of 4 additional fields of study, and we'll talk about those in turn when we get there. You may also notice that on the consent calendar there were rules for 6 additional fields of study as well that we will get underway as soon as possible. Part of the transfer legislation that was introduced that did not eventually pass, but it did call for a focus on the top 25 majors, and so we have identified those across the state, and our goal is that by the end of this coming biennium, we will have fields of study for all 25 of those majors, which will capture at least 65 and maybe upwards of 70% of all transfer students to institutions in Texas. So we see this as a major way of facilitating transfer and really the application of the courses that students take to their chosen degrees, whatever they may be. And then we also have the Program of Study initiative as well, which deals with the programs that are typically offered as associate degrees at 2-year institutions. And what we found over the years that it's almost as difficult and sometimes even more difficult to transfer from a 2-year institution to a 2-year institution in a program. So we're also looking at the programs of study to try to create some better alignment there. And we've organized those by the industry clusters that the state has also recognized as the 16. And we have 2 of those underway with subcommittees under each one of those. And so hopefully when the board meets again next time, we'll have also some programs of study to bring forward for approval as well.
Very good. Thank you. Agenda item number 5J was on the consent calendar. Agenda item 5K is consideration of adopting the Certification Advisory Council's recommendation to the committee relating to requests from Guidance College in an initial certificate of authority to grant degrees in Texas. Dr. Peebles.
So just a little quick background on certificate of authority, because it took me months to get this straight in my own mind as well. For institutions that are not public institutions in Texas or that are not private institutions accredited by a regional accreditor, which in our case would be the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, schools can operate in Texas under one of two things. One would be a certificate of authorization, and those are for schools that are already in operation and that have been accredited by one of the 13 regional accrediting one of the 13 accrediting bodies that we recognize, or have been accredited by a regional accrediting body, but their headquarters are out of state. For those institutions that don't meet that category, they can operate in Texas under a certificate of authority. And currently, we have 3 institutions that operate under a certificate of authority, and this would be the 4th. Y'all approved the 3rd one at the April board meeting. You may recall Medicine in North Texas. The certificate of authority means, in effect, that the coordinating board then acts as the accrediting body, in a sense, for that institution. Certificates of authority are good for a 2-year time period, and they may apply for up to 3 more certificates of authority, but in the meantime, they are expected to apply for and be making progress toward accreditation by either at the regional level or at one of the 13 accrediting bodies that the coordinating board recognizes. At the end of that 8-year period, if they have not achieved that, then their certificate of authority is revoked. So what you have today is an institution that's now known as Guidance College. It was formerly known as Hoodoo University and operates out of Katy, Texas, in Houston area. It has operated under a religious exemption under the coordinating board for some time. Religious exemptions are granted to institutions whose activities and their education is solely directed to religion. And they decided that they wanted to branch out into both education and into Islamic finance. And at that point, then they sort of, if you will, they crossed the line from purely religious-based to some secular-based education. And so at that point, then they need a certificate of authority to come to us. They have applied. Their first application was actually turned down by the Certification Advisory Committee, and they went back to work on it, and they did all the things that were necessary, particularly in terms of finance and assessment of their programs in their institution, to bring themselves up to where they needed to be approved. And so the Certification Advisory Committee has approved them to offer 2 master's degrees, one in Islamic education and one in Islamic finance. The Islamic education degree is really geared toward the teaching of Arabic. And so at some point it may allow students to teach Arabic not only in private schools but also in public institutions. So therefore they need our permission to operate. And then the other would be in Islamic finance. And you may know that finance in the Islamic world is very different. And so at one point I thought about, well, why do this in a Western-dominated finance world? But if you're, if you're in Houston, you may be involved in the oil business, which does a lot of business dealings in the Islamic world, and actually having some knowledge of both Islamic finance and the way it's structured and the way it works, and some sense of Western finance could be quite valuable to folks. So we've looked at this very carefully. It's been, like I said, it's been through 2 rounds with the Certification Advisory Committee, and so we come to you with a recommendation for approval. And I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you may have. We do have a couple of members of the institution here that can also try to answer questions as well.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
So
Mr. Stebbin?
what exactly is Islamic finance? Is it, like, I guess I just don't understand. I mean, it's all numbers. And Aramco's going for IPO pretty soon. I don't think they'll use Islamic finance they list in London.
Well, if I understand this correctly, the biggest distinguishing
Doctor,
feature.
if you've got some people here, why don't we have them come up?
I'll let them do it.
Yes.
That'd be good.
Please join us.
Dr. Peoples, I won't ask you to explain that particular subject.
learn about this a little bit in doing this,
All right.
but I appreciate it.
Dr. Al-Qada, did I pronounce that? Yes, thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Dr. Ghazali?
Yeah, Dr. Hamid Ghazali,
Yes, welcome.
our academic dean.
Okay, from Guidance College.
So why don't you,
Yeah, my question was about Islamic finance and why is it different? What is different? And then, of course, you know, Aramco's going public, right? Or part of it, so that's, you know, they'll have to use, I guess, Western finance. So if you could explain what that is, appreciate it.
Briefly, Islamic finance or the different modes of finance are based on profit, loss, sharing. So there is no lending with interest. It involves like risk for both parties, for the borrower and for the lender, because basically there is no lending with interest. It's a profit loss sharing. So for example, if I want to finance for a house, the Islamic Institute cannot give me $200,000 as a loan. They have to buy that property and possess it, close on it. So at a certain point, that property would be owned by the bank, and they can resell it back to me, definitely with a profit for a certain installment, 15, 20 years, for example. If I want to like initiate a project, maybe I want to build something. There's something called a manufacturing model, where the construction company would take care of the construction itself, and then they can sell it to me with a higher price. So they have to take the liability or the responsibility of building or buying something, and then they can make profit out of that. So there is no direct blending with interest. That's the major difference between the Western versus the Islamic one.
so tell us about your experience with Guidance College.
I'm the CEO of Guidance College and the director of the Islamic Studies department. We do have an Islamic finance department in which I do teach some courses within my area of expertise.
Good. But about the history of the effort to establish the college.
Maybe Dr. Hamdan.
Yeah, I guess it that brings us to the beginning where we started the university. We wanted to offer degrees which are unique and at the same time are needed by the Muslim community in the USA, which is a minority. But if you look, for example, for the number of teachers who teach Arabic or Islamic studies, and just in Houston itself, you're talking about 400 teachers. There is not a single institution in the USA that really offers certification or courses that would prepare these teachers to teach properly in Islamic schools. And we have, in Houston itself, we have about 25 full-time Islamic schools, you see. So there is a need, so we're driven by need to cover these. At the same time, when you look at, I want to buy a house, there is a way that we deal with the bank from an Islamic perspective to buy the house or buy a car. And there are several banks right now, non-Islamic banks that are adopting the Islamic model because it's business. At the end of the day, you pay almost the same amount or even sometimes more interest rate. But the technicalities of doing it, you gotta have some good background in the Islamic finance in order to make the two contracts pay the same, but technically they are written differently. So then we train our students to really do that and understand the model, Islamic model versus the non-Islamic model, how they compare, where they can come together, where they depart from each other, and how can we bring harmony to the people who are living here and satisfy their needs.
So some of your graduates might go into banking that would be a good,
Yes.
good area for
Yes.
them.
Banking, mortgage companies, mutual fund companies, investment companies.
Good. Well, thank you for coming over here today and appreciate your
Thank you for inviting
explanation,
us.
and I'd like to make the motion to approve.
I just have a really quick question along that line. What year did you start guidance? Was it founded?
Yeah,
Guidance.
it was registered back in 2011 with Texas Workforce Commission, and then we started offering courses in 2012.
Okay.
May I ask, I'm sorry, may I ask a quick question for you, Rex? Regarding the certificate of
Authority.
system, my question is, I think of accreditation as being very important for student lending and financial aid. So if you have this provisional 2-year process, how does that work for student lenders?
It does not make, our granting of a certificate of authority does not make the institution eligible for, certainly for federal financial aid. Because in order to be eligible for federal financial aid, you have to be recognized by one of the DOE accrediting bodies. And that may come as they, as they work toward getting accreditation over that 8-year period. Then at that point, if they're recognized by one of those, a DOE recognized, then they may be eligible for Title IV funding.
Let me just add, in a sense, the certificate of authority at the coordinating board for years has acted as sort of address what could be a catch-22. How do you go from not being a college to being one? Now, they've been operating without offering the degrees, and you had a religious exemption for a couple, but this is a way to make sure that they're on the right road to being accredited by a regional accrediting body, and this is the most rigorous way to do this. But to provide assistance. From what I've been told, in terms of historically, they're actually further along in terms of the administration mechanics than typically we would see at this early stage. But it is possible that they could be accredited prior to the limit. It's possible that they might not be accredited, but it's a way to help assure the students that they are doing everything right to get there.
And the certificate of authority, I think, is a prerequisite for SACS accreditation. Yes.
There's no further questions or discussions. I have a motion by Mr. Steen, correct? Yes. Do I have a second? Ms. Acosta? All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate your willingness to make some changes to your original proposal to address some of our questions.
We do appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been
Thank
very
you all.
helpful. Thank you.
Next item will be agenda item 5L, is a report to the Committee on School Closures and/or Teach-Outs pursuant to Chapter 7, Subchapter A, Section 7.75. This is an informational item only. Dr. Peebles.
So this is our quarterly report that we give to you regarding school closures. And again, these are for profit and some of them may actually be nonprofit private institutions operating in Texas, but the vast majority of these institutions are proprietary or for-profit institutions. And at the last meeting, there was a request for a little bit more information about numbers of school closures. And so if you look at the second page of the blue page, then we've provided some sort of historical data there about number of closures over time. And I think it's kind of interesting to point out that in 2012, there were a total of 4, and then in 13, there was 17, and that number kind of ramps up until we get to 2015, where there were 21. And in 16, I think what's important is that there were 3 controlled closures and 12 sudden closures. And a controlled closure is essentially one where the institution has provided for a teach out for the students, and they provided for a way for the records to be transferred to somewhere else. But the students are taken care of in some manner until they finish their degrees or certificates, or at least they're given a period of time to do that. And sudden closures are those where, for example, with one of the institutions that closed last year, students were in a day-long clinical on Saturday, and when they showed up for class on Monday morning, there was a note on the door apprising them that the institution had closed. And since it was up the street, about 45 minutes after that happened, they were here asking questions. And it was a very, and on a personal note, it was the first time that I'd actually talked face-to-face with students. I've talked a lot over the phone, but it's the first time I'd met with a group of students face-to-face who were subject to this. And you realize just how devastating it can be for those students to have put time and money into something that is now suddenly just gone for them. And at least in that particular case, we managed to get most of them into other programs, and we figured out a way to deal with their transcripts and their records. But the one thing I'm a little bit heartened by is that at least in 2017, to date, we seem to be on a slower pace toward closures. Now, we still have the rest of the year to go, so who knows what might happen. But I think that some of the sort of the shakeout in the industry for a lot of the sort of the worst players, if you will, has taken place, and we may be leveling out a little bit. And we give you a little bit of information there, too, about certificates of authority and certificates of authorization. And in this particular year, we've only issued 7 new certificates of authorization, which is somewhat of a slowdown from previous years. So I think what's happening is that this, the shakeout and the dampening has affected the whole country, not just in Texas, but it's also gone nationwide, because a lot of the institutions that closed in Texas also had a presence, some of them in many other states. I mean, ITT, I think, was in 43 states other than just Texas. And so you have thousands of students in many, many places affected by this. And so I think that we've seen some leveling off of this, or hopefully we have.
Dr. Peebles, would you brief us quickly to see if this, if the legislature this session, I know there was discussion about addressing some kind of accountability for some of these institutions as they start to open up, in terms of leaving, you know, many of our Texas citizens holding the bag. And I just, please share some light that there was some movement in the legislature to hold them accountable, whether it's through.
Yeah, there was actually one of the pieces of legislation that the coordinating board recommended dealt with what we call the Chapter 7 schools, and probably in overall terms, it gives us greater oversight of the institutions. But one of the things it does that will be the most helpful to students is it will require these institutions to make sure that they have through letters of irrevocable letters of credit or surety bonds or something that will make sure that they have enough money on hand to at least reimburse students the tuition and fees that they've paid into for the semester. If it closes in the middle of the semester, for example, that the money that students have been put into for that semester, that they will be reimbursed for that. And the other piece of it is it does authorize us and gave us some money to create a repository for student records. And I think that's a big step forward, because a lot of these students don't have access to their records currently. You know, and there's a lot of anecdotal stories about the 100+ institutions that have closed in Texas over the years, and records being stored in people's garages and that kind of thing. And this will provide some central place where students can actually come and get their academic records. Now, it's going to take us some time to get this up and running and functioning well, but at least it does provide, someplace down the road, it provides a way for students to be able to get a hold of those things.
Well, and obviously I'm very proud of the legislation that we were supporters and sponsors of, but the biggest thing I was wanting to hear was the accountability factor of all of this equation is, you know, the surety aspect, or putting up some kind of, you know, surety bond or something that holds them accountable, that they can't just take money from these students and our Texas citizens and just shut down from one day to the next with no accountability. So that was the piece I really wanted to hear about. Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Steen?
Well, just, Ms. Jones, you're relatively new. Is this your first meeting?
Yes.
First day of meetings. Well, one thing you'll hear the commissioner talk about kind of in the big picture is how we really want to focus on the students. And this is an area, I mean, we can be very proud that the coordinating board is around for situations like this, because, you know, Dr. Peoples, you're describing that situation, and, you know, students in class on Saturday show up on Monday, and all they see is something taped to the door saying we've closed. And, you know, thank God there's a coordinating board that they can come, you know, how do they know to come see you about it? But,
well, I think they knew that the coordinating board was down the street. They didn't really know to come see me, but you know, when they got here, the security guard started calling around, and when you know, there was a phone call made to my division, and they said, well, these students are here. And I said, well, you know, they were looking for somebody to talk to, so I said, well, I'll go down and talk to them. And I probably spent about, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour with them. You know, and a lot of it, you know, and quite frankly, there was really not much I could do for them at that particular moment. But it was good to hear, you know, sort of their side of it, if you will. And I think it was also good for them to hear that there was, as you point out, that there was somebody there that could be an advocate for them and at least try to help them move forward.
I just wanted to say, I think I recall hearing this bill in committee. I love the idea of a central repository for student records and transcripts. I hope that there's a chance in future to create more of a nationwide kind of network, whether through linkages with other states or through some sort of central repository or clearinghouse for that kind of thing.
Okay, next item, item 5M, is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the January 2017 annual compliance reports for institutions under the Certificate of Authorization, names beginning with A through O. Dr. Peebles.
So you may recall that we split this into two parts, A through O and then P through Z, because there's so many of them. It's just easier for us to deal with the compliance piece of it. But this is a major part of our oversight because they are required on an annual basis to submit compliance reports that details their enrollment and graduation, their financial status, their accreditation status. And we will use this to try to identify institutions that have problems. I think I've mentioned before that one of the things that we're trying to do is if we have institutions that have identified as having issues, then when they receive an accreditation visit from whoever their accreditor is, then we have trying to tag along with them, and that gives us both the opportunity to take a look at the institution, but also to take a look at the accreditor at the same time and make sure that they're operating the way they should. As you can see, we've broken down the report into our usual categories of those who have submitted everything they need or are in good shape, and those who we're still requesting information from, and those for whom we've identified either accreditation or financial issues with. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
So Dr. Peoples, on the comments section, and I'm looking at page, just for example, page 4, when you mentioned, when you write heightened cash monitoring one status as a result of U.S. Department of Education concerns with administrative capability, and all of these universities have that same comment. What does that mean, or what does that tell us here at the coordinating board?
So essentially what that means is that these institutions are offering federal financial aid, so they're monitored by DOE for their financial status, and they're given a score. The top score is 3, and I believe the bottom score is a -1. And typically what happens is if they're rated at a 1.5 or above, then they're considered to be in stable financial status. And when they fall below that, then they will get some kind of admonishment from the Department of Education, federal financial aid funds, and that's what that heightened cash monitoring means, that they're being watched very closely, and that often will result in those institutions having to put up more money under a letter of credit or a surety bond in some way. But essentially it means that their financial stability is in question, and that also then triggers this for us to watch them more closely.
So when you take a look at all of these assessments that were made by all of these universities and their reporting, does that cause you to take pause and say, maybe we should take a look at the process of certificate of authority or authorization, and to say, I mean, have we as a coordinating board trended to modify that, how we do that? And maybe you have, I don't know the answer
Well,
to that.
in terms of the criteria that we use for granting a certificate of authorization, so all of these institutions are under certificate of authorization. None of these are under certificate of authority. So in terms of the criteria we use for granting a certificate of authorization in the first place, so to speak, we have not really changed that criteria. What we have done, though, is really change the way that we monitor them as we go along and look at them on the back end. Because to get in the first place, they need to be accredited by one of the accrediting bodies that we have recognized. And I think it may be important to point out that the Department of Education recognizes a whole lot more accrediting bodies than the state of Texas does. We only recognize 13 so far, and actually there'll soon be 12. And they recognize a whole lot more than that. So one of the ways that we try to deal with this up front is to look at those accrediting bodies. And there's a process for them coming into Texas and seeking sort of recognition from the coordinating board. And then the other piece of it is again, that we have also begun to look much more closely at those institutions' accreditation status, which you don't really see that reflected in heightened cash monitoring because they only look at their financial stability. But we're also doing more and more to look at their accreditation status in terms of their enrollments in graduates, whether they have the appropriate institutional assessment measures they need to look at their own effectiveness and that kind of thing. And one of the things that we're continuing to look at, though, is whether we need to strengthen our rules even more to accommodate that. And so one of the things that we can look at and will look at is in granting the certificate of authorization in the first place, do we need to make some adjustments there? We'd be glad to look at that.
I think that's a great idea, especially given the fact that it seems like the numbers, and thank you for providing those for us, they're just, in the prior topic, it's just amazing to me that it appears there's a trend, and a trend in certain areas that they're all being looked at, so we ought to take a look at that. I appreciate that.
Just a little background. This is fairly new still, maybe 10 years old, in that the board was directed to really open the doors more to allow the for-profit sector to have more opportunity in the state. And so it probably is a good time to at least look at some of these. I think the commissioner was wondering about that just the other day. I don't know what we would do, but it's had a time to operate. The other thing I'd like to note is a lot of people, when you look at the list, it's a different kind of list than you might imagine, because you'll see Cornell is there, you'll see New Mexico State, Boston University, so there's a range of institutions they're not really identical in the sense that they have a different kind of mission, and they tend to be accredited by, some are accredited by regional accreditors, and others are by more specialized accreditors. And so the specialized expansion of the accreditors was what really happened about 10 years ago. We used to have even a smaller range. Much smaller.
I do believe that if we do take the time to do that, and thank you, David, for the background on that. I wasn't sure how long this had taken place, but it's going to touch so many different aspects that we're talking about just today, whether it's, closing of schools or what it may be. But I do think it's going to open up our eyes to some of the trends of how we might be able to help ultimately the students. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's also worth noting for Rex and his staff's sake that they are, by necessity, spending much more time on the institutions in this range than they were required to before, and it is because of the students, and it's putting a real press on them and their efforts.
Yeah, on all three of them. So.
If there is no further discussion on agenda item 5M, do I have a motion?
For the staff.
Motion by Ms. Costa, second. All in favor? Motion passes. Agenda item 5N is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the report on the fiscal year 2017 annual report of low-producing programs. Dr. Peoples.
So this is to seek your approval for our current recommendations for low-producing programs. And a low-producing program is defined as one that over a 5-year average has a number of graduates that at or below the threshold for those. And the threshold for undergraduate programs is 25, 15 for master's, and 10 for doctoral degrees. So that's the first criteria for low producing, that your average over a 5-year period be below that. The second criteria is that you wind up on that low producing scale for 3 years in a row. And once you do that, then the programs are reviewed by coordinating board staff, and then we make a recommendation to the board about whether those programs then should be recommended for closure or not. Once that recommendation is made, that recommendation goes to the institutions. So ultimately, they're the ones who decide whether to then close a program, consolidate that program, or simply keep it open. And the institutions will look at that. The end result of this is if they decide to, whatever their action is, if they decide to consolidate, or particularly if they decide to keep a program open, then it needs to be reported to the Legislative Budget Board in their next LAR, in the Legislative Appropriations request, so that they have to acknowledge that they're, in other words, they have to acknowledge that they're keeping open a program that has low producing. And it's also important, I think, to note that sometimes there are good reasons for keeping open a program that is low producing, by the way, because it may be the result of a program that particularly feeds a lot of other programs. Physics is often used as a kind of example of this, where physics courses are used in a lot, or are required in a lot of other degrees. And so it may be rather easy for an institution to have the kind of infrastructure it needs to support all of those other degrees that use physics, and at the same time be able to grant a bachelor's degree in physics from time to time as people want it. So there are good reasons for keeping open low-producing programs sometimes, but what this does is it allows us to identify those that meet those criteria for low producing. It then allows us, as a board, for you to make a recommendation on whether they should be closed or not. And again, that recommendation would then go to the institutions, and they'll make the ultimate decision about whether the program should be closed, consolidated, or left open. And as you can see, in this particular go-around, there were 195 programs that met the criteria of falling below the 5-year average. And of those, there were 120 programs that had fallen below that 5-year average for 3 years in a row. And our recommendation is that all 20 of those programs be recommended for closure, and mainly because then the institutions will then, 120, sorry, will then make the decisions about what happens with those programs.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Do I have a motion? Moved by Ms. Acosta, second by Mr. Steen. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5O is consideration of adopting the Architecture Field of Study Advisory Committee's recommendation relating to the courses required by the board-approved architectural field of study as required by Texas Education Code Section 61.823. Dr. Peoples.
Thank you. So you heard me talk a little bit earlier about fields of study in general, and I mentioned that there were 4 that will be coming before you today. Architecture is the first. So what these fields of study do is they identify those courses that will then transfer to a 4-year institution, and actually they can transfer from a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution to another 4-year institution. And not only must they transfer, but they must also be accepted toward that person's degree. So if a person wants to major in architecture, they take these courses at any community college, they transfer to any one of the 7 architecture programs in Texas, then those institutions are required to transfer and apply these courses to an architecture degree. So it really, I've always believed, and I've believed this long before I came to the coordinating board, that fields of study were the key to the transfer problem of students starting one place and when they move to another place losing credit. And I should point out that all of these committees, again, are made up of faculty and instructional administrators. In this case, it will be architectural faculty and administrators from both 2- and 4-year institutions who sat down and sometimes through a very long process arrive at some consensus about what those courses should be and what the nature of those courses are. So the first one that you have in front of you is for architecture. And architecture is one of those programs where there's a lot of undergraduate credit that needs to be taken in architecture to get through the program. So they have arrived at 36 hours of courses. One of the things that we also asked them to do was to also look at core curriculum courses that students should take that would then easily apply to that particular degree. And so they have also recommended that students in the core take English 1301, pre-calculus, and then physics 1401 or 1301 with the lab. So we've also added this piece about trying to make sure that students are taking the appropriate courses in the core that will also apply to their degree as well. We did receive some comments. In all honesty, most of the comments from folks around fields of study usually come from the idea of, well, this is not how my institution does it. And you hear a lot of that in the fields of study committees, and they will eventually sort of get past that point and we'll begin to talk about, okay, so we'll reach a consensus on this course and we may have to change our curriculum a little bit to do this, but they will usually get there. None of the comments that we received about architecture were really substantive in nature. Every comment we receive, we compile those, and we always send those back to the field of study committees for comment. And if they see something substantive of that, there may be a change, but in this case, there were no identified substantive changes.
Okay. Question, Mr. Stedman?
Rex, I mean, do we have authority to force institutions to change their curriculum?
It is in statute, yes. Well, wait, let me qualify this a little bit.
If UT architecture says, well, we just don't do it that way, this trumps the UT architecture department?
The School of Architecture at UT or any other institution it does not require them to change their curriculum. But what it does do is requires them to accept the courses and apply them toward their degree. So in essence then, if they want to start creating that alignment so that they don't wind up having to accept something that doesn't quite fit with their program, it might behoove an institution to change their curriculum a little bit just to create that alignment. And what you will see in the field of study committees quite often is institutions will begin to talk about how, well, you know, we just need to move this learning outcome from this course to this course, and then we'll be in alignment with everybody else. And so that kind of, you will see that sort of consensus building, but it doesn't require them to change their curriculum, but it does require them to accept the courses.
But accept the course for that major?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any further discussion? There's no further discussion. Do I have a motion? So moved. Motion by Mr. Steen, a second. Ms. Acosta, all in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5P is consideration of adopting the Engineering Field of Study Advisory Committee's recommendation relating to courses required for the board-approved engineering field of study as required by Texas Education Code Section 61.823. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So this field of study has gone through virtually the same process with a little bit of twist on it, because what you will see in front of you is actually 4 fields of study that have come out of engineering for mechanical, civil, chemical, and electrical engineering. And Part of what happened with this particular field of study is that we eventually broke it into subcommittees and brought in additional faculty in mechanical and civil to really look at those subspecialties. And while we might think of engineering as a field, in a lot of respects, it really is not. Mechanical engineering is a field and chemical is a field, but engineering itself is not really a field. So what you see are really four proposed fields of study. We received, again, we received some comments also on field of study, actually less so than we did for architecture. But again, we put those back out to the field of study committee, and there was not even anything anywhere close to a majority to change any of the recommendations that were made here. And you can see with engineering, depending on the field itself, they range, there's 30 hours, 35 hours, 39 hours. A lot of this identifies the kind of core courses and lower division courses in math and science that they need to take to be prepared to become engineers. And then in some, you will see more engineering courses. And other civil engineering decided to include 4 courses in engineering in their field of study. And I think that's important because engineering is one of those fields where if you don't start taking engineering courses very early in your career, it's simply going to take you longer to get out because of the sequencing and the prerequisites involved.
I think engineering is a good example of, Mr. Stedman, when you were asking your previous question, you see the number of hours varies depending on the field of engineering. So part of what happens in the field of study guides is the faculty get together and agree on what they can agree on in terms of what should be the same from institution to institution, essentially. So it's not a hard set in stone. It has to be 4 courses or 6 courses. But here are the things that they agree should be in common. So, and this shows you ranges from 39 to 30 hours, depending on the field of engineering.
Is there any further discussion? Do I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Next item agenda is 5Q. It's consideration of adopting the Music Field of Study Advisory Committee's recommendation relating to courses required for the board's approved Music Field of Study as required by Texas Education Code Section 61.823. Dr. Peebles.
Well, thank you. So same process. This one took a while. And if you look at the courses involved in this, some of it may look a little strange because you have, for example, under ensembles, you have a course rubric of MUEN and a course number of 11XX and so on. And this is because there are many ensembles involved in the music degree, and this allows them to use the same numbering system, whether it be a jazz ensemble or an orchestra ensemble or a woodwind ensemble, and on and on and on. And it's even worse for applied study, which really boils down to, and that's almost like music lessons in a particular instrument.
Oboe.
Yeah, oboe, for example, versus the violin, versus the timpani, and so on. And this is also one, there were a lot of, there was a number of comments received about this, and most of them revolved around the issue of piano proficiency. And this also vexed the Field of Study Committee for quite a while because, this is one of those things where I learned more than I really wanted to know in the first place about this as a result. And it's real interesting because there's almost such a thing as developmental piano going on here, because students are expected to demonstrate a certain level of proficiency in piano. And then the argument was over, so do we demand that they have courses in piano, or do we simply have them do it through some other mechanism, and so forth? And there was discussions of hidden prerequisites and marinating students and that kind of thing. And I think what we finally arrived at is that you won't see piano in here because I think the fundamental question for any field of study in terms of where you start is it really conceivable that a student can come from high school to the college setting with that knowledge? And if they can, then you probably don't need to, then you can sort of start someplace else. And probably the classic example of this is really with math. For engineers, their starting point is really Calculus 1. Now, we know that a lot of students don't come from high school with the ability to step into college and do Calculus 1. But is it possible for a student to exit high school and have all of the knowledge and tools that they need to step into Calculus 1? Yes, it is possible if they take the right courses in high school. So we finally decided that, and when I say we, I mean it's sort of coordinating board staff and the music field of study committee decided that piano should probably be left as a proficiency question, because it is possible for a student to come to a college as a freshman with 0 hours and demonstrate the required proficiency in piano, because they may have been a part of the orchestra in high school and learned piano or whatever the case may be. But it really was a real interesting journey to get to the music field of study. So, but you can see they did arrive at 31 hours in music that students can take and then transfer. And this is another one of those programs where if you don't start music really as a freshman, it's very difficult to graduate in 4 years because of the sequencing and the time involved in a music degree.
Okay, is there any further discussion or questions for Dr. Peebles? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? Motion passes. This is very important because it's academic workforce success. We go from music to nursing next, okay?
Yes.
And that's item 5R, in consideration of adopting nursing field of study advisories committee recommendation relating to courses required for the board-approved nursing field of study as required by the Texas Education Code, section 61.823. Dr. Peebles.
So again, virtually the same process. This was a little bit different because some of you may recall that we brought a pre-nursing curriculum that was required by the legislature in the previous session for us to look at a recommended pre-nursing curriculum. And it turns out that using that as a mechanism for identifying what the courses a student should take before they can get into a nursing program also led to a lot of discussion about what kind of courses do nurses need anyway, under any circumstances, and that really helped the nursing field of study go forward with this, because I will admit, and no offense to any of the nurses out there at all, but I was not convinced we would actually be able to pull this one off. Because it's in some respects it's such a difficult field. But as you can see, they wound up recommending 34 hours for a field of study for nursing, and this is for what's generally referred to as a generic nursing program, where a student really intends to go directly to a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree and then set for the registered nursing exam at the end of that. So this is the transfer piece of this from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. And again, we received some comments, but we actually brought in this one, the committee actually came back together for a meeting, and the committee decided that they would leave it as they had originally proposed it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or discussion? There's no further discussion. Do I have a motion? Motion by Ms. Acosta, second by Mr. Steen. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda items 5S 1 through 5, items 5T 1 and 2, items 5U 1. We have discussion on those? Or they're all actually on the consent calendar.
Consent.
Along with agenda items 5S 1 through 5, 5T 1 and 2, and item 5U 1. They're also all on the consent calendar. We go to item 5U 2. Also, it was consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments of Chapter 1 to Chapter 1, Subchapter Q, Sections 1.201, 1.202, 1.204, and 1.205 of the Board Rules concerning the Community and Technical College Leadership Council. Dr. Peebles.
So the Community and Technical College Leadership Council is made up of both presidents or chancellors from 2-year institutions, but also members of boards of trustees. And it's, so part of what this particular rule does, it allows it to exist for 4 more years. And it does make some slight changes in membership. So we have added a couple of members to it. Frankly, it's, at certain points, we've had trouble with getting a quorum for this particular body. And so we think that by adding a couple of members and slightly altering the membership to reflect membership from both the Lamar Institutes of Technology and the Texas State Technical College system, that we will get a quorum easier.
Very good. Any questions or discussion?
So when you say difficult getting a quorum, are you mean for people to come to Austin to come to meetings?
Yes.
And are you able to conference people in, or?
We can, but under the, as I understand it, under the Open Meetings Act and the
So this
laws
is
that
covered
confront
by
us,
that?
it's difficult to conduct a meeting that way. We sometimes have them conference in. But part of the problem is that while we can do it from this end, it's not always possible on the other end for that to happen.
Does open meetings law cover this type of thing?
It does, yes, sir. If it is difficult or impossible to obtain a quorum at one physical location, now, I guess, let me go further. If you've got a quorum that's willing to come to Austin, but it's just a bare quorum, teleconferencing would not be available to other members of the committee. We had hypothetically a 15-member committee. The teleconferencing option would not be available.
And all these council, they have to post notice and everything just like we do?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Those are posted at least 8 days in advance.
Also, in this case, because of the size of the committee, we had at least one member that had health problems, and that made it more difficult. And just having a slightly larger committee, that would not have been the quorum wouldn't have been a problem. So we, no.
Is there any further, I'm sorry, are you finished, Dr. Gardner? Yes. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5W. We will now move to item 5W, which is a report to the committee on the results of the validity study for the Texas Success Initiative assessment. This is an information item only. Dr. Luce, senior psychometrician from the College Board, and Ms. Kathy Montanese, senior assessment manager actually from the College Board, will provide a brief summary of the study and be available to answer questions. Daryl Booker, the Assistant Commissioner of College Readiness and Success, and Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner of Strategic Planning and Funding, will also be available to answer questions.
In the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jarrell Booker, Assistant Commissioner of College Readiness and Success. As you know, state law under the TSI initiative requires all entering students to be assessed for college readiness to enter their first level college course. As you know, if they do not show college readiness, they have to enter in a development education program. In the interest of time, I just wanted to give you a little brief overview of TSI. We had a standard setting process that set the original score. We intended to come back and check that original score to base it off actual performance. So the people here from College Board will discuss what they came up with the validity study and how we looked at that original score and where we are now.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go through my prepared slides very, very quickly. The purpose of the study is actually to determine if the TSI with current cut scores are being used productively. The details are on the slide for the specific purpose. The college readiness cut scores that were set is actually when a student receives that score, it's an indicator that the student is college ready, meaning that the student has the necessary content knowledge to receive instructions that for which he is likely to succeed in the course by earning a grade of C or higher. Ideally, a cut score is associated with a 67th probability of success. Again, is receiving a grade of C or higher. The current cut score in math is 350. In reading is, and most of the data are from college algebra. The cut scores for reading is 351, and for the writing test, there are actually two tests, a multiple choice test and an essay test. And to be deemed college ready, a student will have to receive a score of 350 on the multiple choice and a score of 5 or higher on the essay, or alternatively, 363 on the multiple choice and an essay of 4 or higher. When they receive those scores, they are placed in English composition courses. For this study, we use the data provided by the THECB. This is equivalent to about 1 year of data. It is, the College Board considers it best practice to evaluate the cut scores and the test, whether it's doing what it is supposed to do. Based on that data, we extracted the data for specific analysis, meaning for each course and each test. And customarily, the required sample size for higher institutions of higher education is 50, and as you can see, it's plenty large. Based on the data that was provided to us, this is just an example of how the analysis went. This is for reading. We're looking at the relationship of the cut of the placement score on the test and the probability of receiving a course grade of C or higher. On the data, we fitted a mathematical model, and the curves represent the mathematical model. To determine the expected probability of success in the course on the specific cut score, we basically just project from the score of 351, which is the cut score for reading, it projects to a probability of 0.68. So this method is done for each one of the tests, and we determine the probability of success in the course as indicated in the slide. Now, this type of information is very useful in determining whether you'd like to consider adjusting the cut scores. Again, the standard is 0.67 probability of getting a C or higher. However, there are other information that needs to be considered, and that is if the students, based on the cut scores, are getting placed in the class, and if it's a correct decision. A correct decision means that if a student gets a score that's above the cut score and the student passes the test, that's a correct decision. But if a student gets a score that's below the cut score and fails the class, then that's also a correct decision. We would always want to have the correct decision to be a high percentage, but there's also the underplacement and overplacement that we'd like to minimize, especially the underplacement. The underplacement are actually those students who, based on the results of the test, are assigned in developmental education, but had the student been put in a college, in a credit-bearing course, the student would have succeeded. So we would like to minimize that. When we look at the data, this is what we got with about 60% of correct placement each time. And some states have used 60% of correct placement as the standard. So this is something that needs to be considered when adjusting the cut scores also. And the last slide is basically just a summary emphasizing that both the probability of success and percentage of correct placement, underplacement, and overplacement need to be considered in balance.
Thank you. The validity study is online. We spent a lot of time going through comments, meeting with the College Board. We even actually internally tried to mirror their study to get additional data. We wanted to bring this to you earlier in April, but there was a delay with legal counsel through the College Board because we know timing is super important for our institutions to get this implemented. But we think it's based off what you said, Mr. Steen, it's in the best interest of the students to do this as soon as possible. I even know the commissioners had an opportunity to look at some of the essays and really see where they were, so we feel very confident about where we are with these rules, and we think our institutions in the state of Texas will be able to implement it in time, although it won't be easy, but I know they'll do what's best for the kids moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mondesi, and thank you, Dr. Bay, for being here. We appreciate that. Is there any further discussion or questions? If there's no further discussion, do I have a...
Mona, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sir.
No, not in the interest of time. It's just unless you have questions.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion? Moved by Ms. Acosta, second.
This is just a report. The next item is the action item.
Yeah, that's right. Next item. Okay, so we've got a report. Thank you all very much. The agenda item 5U3 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments of Chapter 4, Subchapter C, Section 4.57 of Board Rules concerning the Texas Success Initiative. Jarrell?
So in the interest of time, we received 59 comments from 20 different institutions totaling. You see in your packet how they're summarized, but I would say there are three main points. One, that the students really need developmental education, and based off the study, we find that that's not the case for all these particular students. There will be students who do need developmental ed, but based off that study, there is a portion of students who, if they score at least a 340 or above, should be considered college ready. The second piece is timing. Like I mentioned earlier, the timing of implementation for this. We wanted to get it to you a little sooner to give institutions a heads up, but we're telling them now this is what we're proposing. Hopefully, if the board's happy with this, we can move forward. We're letting them know now. And the last is the study itself. I think College Board has a very good reputation since they also do the SAT. The validity study met industry standard, and we have a very large sample size with what the College Board came up with and what the coordinating board staff came up with. And we're pretty happy with the study and move passage of the proposed rules at 340 and the implementation starting this fall.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or discussions? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5U 4 through 9, items 5V 1 through 7, and agenda items 5U 4 through 9 and 5 through 7 were on the consent calendar. Agenda item 5W was discussed earlier in the agenda. Agenda item 6 is adjournment. If there's no further movement, a motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you all very much.